When we put our jumper on and off, most of us will pull our sleeve out by using the opposite hand to opposite arm. Or sometimes you'll take it from the bottom and you'll go up over the top and your arms will be crossed. Same as when we tie our shoelaces. When we tie our shoelaces, we take one hand over the top of the other, and it requires this skill called crossing the midline. Same as when I brush one side of my teeth, I take my hand across my body and brush on the opposite side of my body. The reason why we need that is not just for daily living, but for school. So I'm going to write my name across the top, and I'll show you what happens. Now I'm going to give you some ideas of what happens when children are older. The reason why I got into early childhood in the first place is I want to prevent this from happening. So I had grade 1s and 2s who I started with. I was referred to them through DHS, and I would see very frustrated children in class because every time they went to read across the page or every time they used to write across the page, their body would move. So similar to our hand-eye coordination activity, if we can't cross the midline, then I can't read this without moving my body to be able to see it. If you imagine on this page, or if it's a whiteboard, the middle of my body sits in the middle of this large piece of paper. So my left eye has to track across to the right-hand side of the page and use both sides of my brain at the same time. The right-hand side of my brain coordinates my left eye, and the left-hand side of my brain coordinates my right eye. If I can't coordinate my left eye going across the midline and over to the other side, then my whole body has to move just to read my name. That's exhausting. If you imagine every time a grade 1 or 2 has to read something on the whiteboard and their whole body has to move, or every time their teacher moves around the classroom and they have to follow their teacher with their eyes, it's exhausting. So what happens here and how we can make sure our children are ready for school with this is when they're ages between 4 and 4.5, I want you to ask them to draw a rainbow. What I do is I put one mark here on one side of the paper and I put another mark on the other side of the paper, and I want them to draw me a big rainbow all the way from one side of the paper over to the other side of the paper. And what I'm looking for is some children will get to the middle and they'll swap hands. You might see some children go from one hand to the other. That's showing that they're not yet crossing the midline. Some children will go all the way to the middle, but they'll drop off towards one side. They can't quite yet coordinate both sides of their brain at the same time. And some children will avoid the activity altogether because it's just too much, too overwhelming, know that I'm going to fail, don't want to do it. So the more we can encourage 4-year-olds to try this as much as we can, then the more they're going to develop that skill of crossing the midline. Another skill that I want you to try and do is this one. You don't have to get up from your chair, it's fine. I just want you to try and find your opposite ear. So just with one hand, find the opposite ear. Pretty simple for us, yeah? Pretty simple. If you ask a 4-year-old to do that, it's very challenging. Good job. We're even checking the wipes. I love it. What you'll see most 4-year-olds do is they'll go same ear, same side. And that's okay if we're 4. But if we're starting to get 4.5, 5, we really need to start to understand our body enough that we have 2 sides of it and that we can cross the middle of our body. So if you can check all your kids tomorrow and make sure that they can do that, that is awesome. The other one I want to make sure they can do is we take one arm out to the side and then we swap. So have a try without knocking your partner out. So just one hand out to the side and swap. You're doing good. Fantastic. People who can't cross the midline, children will get stuck. You'll see them like this. They won't be able to stretch one arm out to the opposite side and coordinate both sides of the body at the same time. So when we go to draw a rainbow, we usually have little rainbows. Or another great thing to look at for children is I ask them to draw me a house. I'll draw a house when I have a child with poor crossing the midline. And the house is usually very small and in the middle. That's where you'll typically find the house when we're having trouble seeing our world in 2 halves. If I ask them to draw a sun, they'll usually draw me a sun, but their whole body will move to draw me that sun. And again, it's showing me that the body can't quite reach across its whole body and they want to use their midline to be able to move around everywhere. So nice house, if we can, a big house can start to develop that skill of crossing the midline. Another thing that you might see out in the yard, if you have an easel out in the yard, these are for the educators that are listening, is if you're looking out in the yard and you're looking at a little one on an easel and they're painting, make sure that they're in the middle of the easel and they're painting on both sides of their body. What children will typically do if they're struggling with crossing the midline is they'll stand to one side of the easel and they'll just paint on the half that they're standing on. And then they may even swap hands to paint on the other side. We want to make sure that children are going all the way across their body.